Hey, what's up? It's Frank here from Data Driven, Impact Quantum, and of course, franksworld.com. So what's interesting is I want to a post I made yesterday that kind of blew up. And some of the questions that came about it, I think, are interesting in the sense that, let's see, can I do side? Yes, it will let me do side by side. So what's interesting, yeah, there it is. What's interesting about this is we have this kind of anecdotally, and I think this speaks to a much larger kind of data science problem, right? So this actually was research done by Microsoft according to the post. I haven't been able to dig it up yet, but if you know where to find it, please let me know. One of the things that I find fascinating about this is it kind of proves something that we already knew intuitively, or at least had experienced personally. So the original context of the post was shared by a gentleman named Ali, and I forget his name. Shame on me. Let's go dig up that post. Ali Merchant, and basically the post was back-to-back meetings are messing our brains. Here's some cool research from Microsoft. Microsoft's Human Factors Lab measured the brain activity of 14 individuals. For those with breaks between meetings, their brains were steady and experienced coolness. For those without breaks between meetings, their stress increased with time, suggesting a buildup of stress. It's almost 2023. Either we need to fix meetings or kill them. Our health literally depends on it. Now, I wouldn't go that far. I think that given that people are collaborative creatures, meetings are to stay. They ever since we were sitting around the campfire in times immemorial. It's one of those things. I do, however, agree that collaboration does not necessarily require a meeting, and I think that largely this is I wouldn't say solved problem, but it's a known problem, and I think it's interesting on several accounts. One, we kind of knew this, right? Whenever you had meetings that were just back to back to back to back in physical spaces, you would at least have the opportunity usually to walk to somewhere. But there have been times when, I'm like bouncing up and down because I still have to go to the bathroom, but I won't be late for the next meeting. So in a sense, the convenience of being able to meet with people from around the world within the same hour has been enormously transformative in terms of productivity. However, not having breaks between uh, meetings, you don't have to get up and walk to another side of the building, another conference room or whatever. In the comments that came up, and there was an interesting discussion in there, I was talking about, um, should we study students? So first off, I want to say, and there was a lot of questions about, well, what constitutes a break, right? I'm not talking about it, I don't know what they constitute a break, but just intuitively, I know um, just going out and letting the dogs out or just walking around for 5 minutes to me constitutes a break. Going, getting a cup of coffee, right? And kind of talking with, if the kids are home, talking with them or talking with the wife. It's that is true. There's nothing in this post. Am I pointing it? No, I'm pointing in the right direction. There's nothing in this post that indicates what exactly constitutes a break. However, I think we all know from personal experience, our lived experience, as the kids say now, that when you do have these meetings and you're on different meetings all day, it does take a toll on you. Right now, again, this from the data scientist in me is like, well, the sample size is only 14 people. And was that 7 people had no breaks and 7 people did? If so, that's an even smaller sample set. In short, I would say, again, small sample sets are not necessarily bad. It just depends on what your context is, right? If I flip a coin 7 times, I'm not exactly going to get 3 and 4 kind of, you know, assuming the coin is completely honest. I'm not going to get 4 heads, or I might get 4 heads and 3 tails, or vice versa. But I'm certainly not going to get 7, right? 7 heads in a row or 7 tails in a row. That's likely not to happen. Uh, Again, I wouldn't base my entire life around or organization around this had I not also had the lived experience of knowing that, when you do go from meeting to meeting, it does drain you. Another question I had on the chat was talking about, let's see, it was fascinating the way that it did. Yeah, and then it was Alina Beresford. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Um, what's the definition of break in this research? That's true, right? And she said, well, what if you're heavily, I'm paraphrasing, what if you're heavily focused on completing a heavy analytical or creative type of work? Yeah, that's right. Like, so a break is not necessarily just, I see I have a comment. Here we go. Evil devil cuckoo bot. I know who you are. Small sample sizes always suck, man. If we're trying, yeah, that's true. Uh, Small sample sizes are are usually bad. They're almost always bad. I would say sometimes though. I mean, but we all know we've all been in those situations where we do feel tired after that. So yeah, you're right. Small sample sizes do kind of mess with the results. So I wouldn't put too much weight behind the study. I would love to see this kind of blown up by 10x or 100x in terms of how they do this. Safe to say that, eh, you know, straight me or straight focusing for 8 hours. Very few people can do that. And even those that do have very special kind of hacks and things like that. Because then this is actually something I studied kind of a bit a few years back, is that, again, it all depends on what you're trying to do, right? If you're trying to get something, if you're trying to learn something, there's definitely strategies for that. There's nutrition, there's activity, all the things you wouldn't necessarily think about. But this is a rabbit hole to go down. But the short of it is that, and scheduling meetings back to back, it's not going to kill you, right? I don't think our lives are quite on the line if it happens once or twice a week. But it being a habitual um, thing is definitely going to take a toll. Now, that having been said, what do we do about this? Well, one of the things that I saw right now, I work at Red Hat, and Red Hat has this. There was this discussion going on something that Red Hat has called Memo List, which is basically, for the Microsofties watching this, is kind of um, like the Yammer homepage, right? So um, basically, it's this email discussion list that virtually everybody in the company subscribes to, and it was basically, someone had suggested, hey, start normalizing starting meetings 5 minutes after the hour, something to that effect. And I think that's what they were getting at, right? Is that just a 5 minute get up, stretch, walk around, bio break, go outside, look at a window, or, pet the dog or cat, whatever, I think is what they were going for, right? Because focused work does take energy. Focused work does take a certain amount of mental effort. Now, that having been said, once you're in the groove, stay in the groove. Don't be like, well, it's 5 after the hour, I got to do it. That's not a good strategy either. So ultimately, I thought this was interesting because it finally put a picture or data visualization around something we had suspected um, over the last couple of years of COVID. All right. So the real topic of the video I want to discuss today is my quantum bookshelf. Now, this is by far not the most exhaustive list of my books, because they're still in boxes. Apparently, I was looking for the big heavy one I have, but I can't seem to find it. So here are ones that I bought since moving to the new house. So they were delivered directly here. So I talked about this one briefly, and you can see that I am still starting it. I'm still pretty new into it. Alex Kahn was actually in my comment feed, actually, when I posted this book. So thank you. Apparently he's local. He's based in Maryland or DC area. And so that's pretty cool. This so far has been an interesting book. It's really my first kind of foray into Amazon bracket. Obviously, having been so far entrenched in the Microsoft ecosystem, I have not put a lot of time and effort into learning AWS. That is something that just the nature of what I do now at Red Hat is cross-platform, cross multi-cloud. That's something that I'm changing rapidly. And fun fact, I actually will be at reInvent this year, so that'll be even more interesting. They do have certification kind of labs and stuff going on, so maybe I'll land a certification there. Most of the work I've been doing with quantum has been around the space of Qiskit, right? And so here's an interesting book. This is actually meant to be a, believe it or not, a high school textbook, which is all settled around Intro to Quantum Computing with Qiskit is the name of the book. And who is the, I can't figure out who the author is. More of a textbook kind of workbook type thing. I've not gone through it yet, full disclosure. I just saw it, and my customers who bought this also bought. This is a book I am eagerly reading, although I need to finish it and do a proper review. But Brian Lenihan is an awesome writer. We've actually interviewed him on Impact Quantum. And this is particularly interesting because it is strictly speaking more about kind of how companies are using this and how they're succeeding. It's a follow-up to his other book and that. So another, but it's not as technical as kind of the other ones. Here's an interesting book by Macaulay Culkins, and I believe he's active on LinkedIn. This looks like an interesting read. It's definitely something I'm going to go through. I did thumb through it, and there is a pretty good description of the different gates different quantum gates. So that's interesting to read. And what really triggered this was someone who used to attend a lot of my user group talks locally in user group meetings here in the DC Metro, had asked me, like, what's a good book to start with? So one of the books that he was going to do was something called Quantum Computing for Everyone. Now, oddly enough, I actually struggled with that book, so I didn't feel like everyone. Now, granted, that may not be the fault of the author. It may just be his writing style didn't jive with my understanding of it. Which again, full disclosure, not a quantum physicist. I never even played one on TV. So it's definitely something that I am still getting my feet wet into and things like that. And the best way to solve this problem is to read. So speaking of which, I saw this book, and this looks really cute. How to Teach Quantum Physics to Your Dog. And this does a really good job of explaining kind of the typical, the underlying quantum physics aspects of quantum computing. Now, as we get further into the development of the quantum ecosystem, are we going to need to have an understanding of that? Nah, probably not, because most developers would not know electrical engineering. Most software developers would not know electrical engineering if it came up and smacked them in the face. And that's not a dig. I have to hire electricians to do stuff like, and I have a comp sci degree, right? So those are very different disciplines. However, I don't think we've hit that point where the abstractions are so good that you don't have to think about the underlying hardware we don't have the abstraction layer well enough that we can completely ignore the underlying hardware. We're not there yet. I think we're still very much in the vacuum tube days where it's still we have a long way to go. Now, that having been said, it does help understand, because some of the things that you encounter in quantum computing are just so weird and bizarre that it does help to at least have, if not an understanding, because I think it was Richard Feynman who said, if you understand quantum physics, then you really don't understand it. I'm sure there are people that do understand it, but here we are. So it does help kind of get an overall feel for, like, hey, well, why are we tapping into these quantum systems to get this level of randomness or uncertainty or superposition, right? Like, why is Schrodinger's cat such a big deal, right? how do you explain that? So that getting a good book around that, getting whatever that is. Michio Keiko has a really good book on that. I'm blanking on the name, but he talks about um, he's a quantum physicist. I think he's a professor at CUNY up in New York. But in any case, it's good to get kind of a background in on that. So that having been said, I figured I'd stream a little bit early today, and hope you're having a good Monday. And so there's a little bit of my quantum bookshelf. The books you don't see are the books I mentioned. Brian Lenaham's first book, which I'm blanking on the name, but it was kind of the predecessor to the Quantum Excellence book, which the first book was an awesome read. The other book was Introduction to Quantum Computing and Applied Approach, which was kind of a textbooky type thing that I actually picked up last time I was in Seattle, and that was just before the COVID lockdowns. And the other book was Quantum Computing for Everyone, which I didn't feel like everyone, so. Maybe that's me. Maybe I'll pick it up again. Maybe I've learned enough since then. As always, you can check me out online at various data platforms. We go, Frank Diggs Data. And speaking of Seattle, Andy Leonard, my co-conspirator and brother from another mother, and co-host on a number of podcasts. He's actually presenting at the, I think he's doing a pre-con today out at the PASS Summit, which is just, I think, their first in-person one since the pandemic. And it'll be, I'm not going to bug him, but hope he does well. And so it'll be interesting. Hopefully we'll get some live streams from him and we'll put that on the podcast. But speaking of podcast, let me record this so I can also redo this so I can also put it on the podcast. So this is Frank here from Data Driven, and I just want to let folks know that Andy is at the PASS Summit this week, and I am going to AWS reInvent. And as someone who's relatively new to the Amazon ecosystem, I am going to spend some time learning and studying kind of all the features and offerings that are available in the AWS cloud. Now, obviously, I do have some exposure because I had to do some competitive intelligence, so I could speak intelligently with customers on rival offerings in the AWS ecosystem. But I'm also eager to learn more about something called Amazon Bracket, which is their quantum computing service. But there's also some basic fundamentals that I just need to get my head around so I can, before reInvent, so I can get the most out of it when I'm there. So look for an upcoming series that's going to be probably just a series on data driven called Pre-Invent. And I'll look to do a couple of maybe live streams and stuff like that. You all can watch me struggle getting logged into, getting set up with the IM users and stuff like that. That has been a different paradigm shift than what I'm used to. And just talking about kind of, what would an Azure guy or gal think about, getting their feet wet into the AWS ecosystem. Now, full disclosure, this is my first rodeo with AWS. I've been doing some stuff at Red Hat with ROSA, Red Hat OpenShift service on AWS. So it's not completely, I'm not going in completely raw. I've also written a number of Alexa skills using the platform. And so it's not completely new, but I definitely would not consider myself an AWS, system administrator type. Now, one of the things that I am pondering, and I do have about 2 weeks before it starts, is that they have certification kind of events and kind of facilitators there. So maybe I'll end up leaving Vegas with a certification. Who knows? But I just want to give folks a heads up on that. All right, so that was the you'll hear that later on the podcast feed, and I did that about 16 minutes in. But that's all I got. Hope you have a great week, and it's Monday, so start off strong, finish strong. And I'll play the cool outro graphic. Where would that go?